To understand the massive, sprawling world of the Thousand Nights and a Night, you have to start not with a story about a genie or a flying carpet, but with the man who decided to bring it to the English-speaking world. Volume 1 of Richard Francis Burton's translation is a bit of an outlier. It doesn't dive straight into the magic. Instead, it functions as a doorway, a long and deeply personal introduction that explains why these stories matter, and, perhaps more importantly, why Burton felt he had to tell them exactly as they were. Burton wasn't your typical Victorian scholar sitting in a quiet library in London. He was a traveller, a diplomat, and an explorer who spent much of his life in places most people in his era only read about in sensationalist pamphlets. He had travelled through the rugged landscapes of Africa and the vast reaches of South America. For Burton, the act of translating these tales wasn't just a scholarly pursuit or a way to make a living. He described it as a labour of love, but also as a psychological necessity. He spoke about the desolation of exile and the crushing weight of isolation that comes with long journeys through harsh, unfamiliar territories. In those moments, when the natural world feels indifferent or even hostile, stories become a talisman. They are a way to keep the mind occupied, to build a world of colour and human connection when the physical reality around you is nothing but dust and silence. This brings us to the heart of what Burton wanted to achieve. To understand his mission, we have to understand the era he was living in. The mid to late 19th century was a time of intense curiosity about the Orient, but that curiosity was often filtered through a very specific, very polite Victorian lens. If a British writer wanted to adapt a Middle Eastern folktale, they would almost certainly strip it of anything that might cause a scandal. They would remove the grit, the raw sexuality, and the complex, often uncomfortable social realities to create something that felt like a harmless fairy tale. They wanted something for the nursery, something that fit into the moral framework of the time. Burton had no interest in that. He had a deep disdain for what he called these sanitized fairy book adaptations. He didn't want to give the English public a polite version of the East, he wanted to give them the truth. He wanted to present an unvarnished version of the text. This was a radical, and at the time, quite controversial stance. He wasn't just translating words, he was attempting an ethnographic study. He believed that to truly understand a culture, you had to see its stories in their raw state, including the parts that were provocative or even scandalous. He wanted to preserve the grit and the complexity that made the original Arabic and Persian sources so vital. This commitment to authenticity is why his work was so unusual. Because the material was so much more explicit and culturally raw than what was considered acceptable, he couldn't just publish it through standard channels. He had to use a sort of literary workaround, publishing the work through a fictitious entity called the Karma Shastra Society, presenting it as a private edition for subscribers only. It was a way to bypass the strict obscenity laws of the time and ensure that his unvarnished vision reached the people who would actually appreciate its complexity. In this first volume, Burton also takes us into the social mechanics of storytelling itself. He spends time describing the oral traditions of the Bedouin, the nomadic tribes of the desert. For these people, storytelling wasn't just a way to pass the time, it was a vital social ritual. He describes scenes of campfires in the desert, where tales are woven into the fabric of the night to reward hospitality and to maintain the social bonds of the tribe. In this context, the stories aren't just entertainment. They are the glue that holds a community together during the long, dark hours. This cultural context is essential because it explains the unique structure of the Thousand Nights and a Night. You've likely heard of the frame story, and this is the ultimate example of it. The collection is built on nested narratives, stories within stories, which contain stories within those stories. This isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a reflection of the oral tradition Burton observed. In a campfire setting, a storyteller might use one tale to capture an audience, and then, as that tale reaches a point of suspense, they might introduce another character who tells a story of their own. It's a way to maintain engagement, to keep the listener hooked through the night. This structure creates a sense of infinite depth, a labyrinth of human experience where one thread leads to another in a way that feels both organic and mesmerizing. As we look at Burton's work, we see a tension that defines much of his legacy. On one hand, he is a meticulous scholar, providing exhaustive footnotes and deep cultural context. He is trying to do something almost scientific, to map out the folklore and social structures of entire regions. On the other hand, He is clearly captivated by the sheer immersive power of the fantastic. He is caught between the role of the objective ethnographer and the role of the man who is deeply moved by the magic and adventure of the tales themselves. There's also a personal weight to this project that we shouldn't overlook. Burton didn't start this massive undertaking alone. He began it as a collaboration with his friend, John Frederick Steinheiser. But Steinheiser passed away before the task was finished, leaving Burton to face the monumental challenge of completing the translation on his own. This adds a layer of solitary determination to the work. When you read Burton's prose, there is a sense of a man wrestling with a vast, chaotic ocean of text, trying to impose order upon it while respecting its wildness. This leads us to a larger question about the nature of folklore and how we consume it. Burton's work forces us to confront the tension between authenticity and adaptation. When we encounter stories from other cultures, there is always a temptation to clean them up or to make them more palatable to our own sensibilities. We often do this without even realizing it, smoothing over the edges of a culture until it fits our preconceived notions of what that culture should be. Burton's refusal to do this, his insistence on the unvarnished truth, challenges us to accept the stranger, the provocative, and the complex on their own terms. He argues, through his very method, that the value of folklore lies in its ability to show us the world as it is experienced by those who live it, not as we wish them to live it. The stories in the 1,000 Nights and a Night are not just escapist fantasies, they are windows into the values, the fears, and the social structures of the people who told them. They show us how people in different eras and different lands navigated the complexities of love, betrayal, justice, and survival. By starting with this massive, scholarly, and deeply personal introduction, Burton sets a high bar for everything that follows. He isn't just promising a collection of stories, he is promising a journey into a different way of being. He is preparing the listener for a world that is much larger and much more complicated than the one they inhabit. As we move from this foundational volume into the actual narratives, we leave behind the translator's voice for a moment and enter the world of the tales themselves. But the shadow of Burton's intent remains. We carry with us his idea that stories are a tool for survival, a way to combat the darkness and the silence. We carry his insistence that these stories deserve to be heard in their full, messy glory. The structure he has laid out, the nested stories, the endless loops of narrative, is designed to pull you in. It is designed to make you forget the time, much like the campfire stories of the Bedouin. You start with one character, and before you know it, you are 3 layers deep into a story about a king, a thief, or a spirit, and you find yourself wanting to know how it ends, even as the story shifts again. In many ways, Volume 1 is a manifesto. It is a statement of purpose for a project that would eventually span 10 volumes and change the way the English-speaking world viewed Eastern literature. It's a reminder that behind every great collection of folklore, there is a human impulse to make sense of the chaos through the power of the spoken word. So, as we move forward, keep in mind that what follows isn't just a series of adventures. It's a massive, interconnected web of human experience, presented through the lens of a man who saw the power of storytelling as a way to survive the world. The magic is there, certainly, but the real substance lies in the grit, the truth, and the endless, looping dance of the narrative itself. The journey is just beginning, and the world it opens up is far deeper than any single story could ever be.